Welcome to the North Tonawanda Football Hall of Fame YouTube channel. I'm Ed Holinsky. Glad you could join us here today. We have another terrific guest. This gentleman from Alaska played at North Tonawanda in the 1959 and 1960 seasons. He's got an interesting story that I'd like to share with you today. Please welcome the one and the only Bert Gore. Bert, good to see you. Glad you could join me here today.
Nice to be with you, Ed.
You are in Alaska.
Yes, I am. Palmer, Alaska.
You are, and it looks like gorgeous. You are outside, so it's not like one of these backgrounds that's set in on this type of platform. For people who are not aware of you, growing up in North Tonawanda, give us a story about that.
Okay. Growing up in North Tonawanda, now I've listened to several of your previous interviewees, and I thought they had it pretty easy. And by that I mean, when I was growing up, it seems like I was in one fight right after another. My grandparents lived on Summer Street, where I lived initially. Dad was off in World War II, and Mom lived at home. She was teaching school, I believe, at Colonel Payne at the time, and we lived next to the Tony and Mama DeFrancisco on Summer Street. If you were lucky on Sunday, you were invited to their house for Sunday dinner, which was always some pasta with a great tomato sauce. And I learned through my parents that their one son, I believe it was Danny, taught me how to swear, and it served me throughout my entire life. I learned so well. Shortly after that, my grandparents, Bessie and Charlie Selesky, moved one block over to Kyle Street. And it was at that time that I started going to Colonel Payne High School. And everything went smooth at Colonel Payne. It's just that after school, I had to walk to my grandparents on summer. And it was always, they lived close to the Ascension Church. And as the closer you got to my grandparents and the Ascension Church, there was always some kids loitering on the street. And it always turned out to be a fist city. We had kids off to the right were the avenues, and they were all the Polish folks. And we had to the south of them or left, we had the Italian neighborhoods. And it seemed like I was either fighting the Polish kids or I was fighting the Italian kids trying to get to my grandparents' house. And that went on for maybe 2 to 3 weeks. And after that, we all settled down, got along, and we ended up playing football on the streets. And we played kick the can because there wasn't a playground anywhere around that neighborhood. And that's where I spent a lot of my time after school until my mom or dad picked me up from work. After that, my folks moved out to Mazda Terrace, and I continued to go to Colonel Payne through, I believe it was 4th grade. And then they built a house on Rui Road, which is just about the last road in the city limits. And I remember my mother telling me, "You're going to be going to Wurlitzer." Well, at the time when we built our house, the neighbor, Zoltan Kish, he and my dad played on the team together in 1936. And I did drop off or mail you some scrapbooks that my grandmother had from 1936. They built houses on Rui Road. And Mom told me, she said, "You're going to Wurlitzer and you're going to be meeting kids from Martinsville." She said, "And they are tough and they're mean." So that kind of set the tone for the first encounter at Wurlitzer High School. The school bus stopped.
You mean Wurlitzer Elementary School?
Wurlitzer Elementary School.
Okay. Because you'd be going to too many high schools at this point. You know that?
No.
You kept saying high school.
I meant, no, we went to Wurlitzer grade school.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Okay, so Gail and I would walk to Wurlitzer because we missed the bus cutoff by about 2 houses. And we became good friends. And the first couple of weeks of school, it was much the same. We played a game called Pom Pom Pull Away, where the kids would line up on one side, there'd be a person in the center, and they had to run across the lawn and without getting tagged or touched. And of course, that caused an issue because you didn't tag me, you didn't touch me with the boys. The girls were okay with it. And it ended up quite frequently being a tackle sport. And that ensued with usually with me, it involved a fight after school. And the principal knew this was going on. And he would frequently watch from his window up at Wurlitzer School. And the days that I was losing badly, occasionally Gail Kish would run over and jump on one of the guys' backs and start pounding him in the head until the fight subsided. And the principal said, okay, that's it, I'm coming down. And it ended up being where the two fighting groups had to stagger the time they left schools, and it went day by day. One group would get out at 2:30 or 3, and the other ones had to stay an hour, and the next day we rotated where Gail and I got to go home early and the other crews. But after a while, everybody got their the pecking order right, and Wurlitzer School was just a whole lot of fun. Gail and I continued to have a lot of fun at school. We didn't fight anymore, but we did get into trouble a little bit. And for those who don't remember, back then in the 50s, they had a cloakroom attached to your homeroom, and if you were misbehaving, they would send you into the cloakroom. Well, Gail and I spent a lot of time in the cloakroom, and it got pretty boring. So in the winter, what we would do is the kids would come to school, they take off their jackets, they take off their boots, put their gloves in their pockets or sleeves, and then put on their classroom shoes and go in for class. We would be in the cloakroom. We'd start switching shoes. We'd start switching gloves and mittens. We changed hats around, and we had a great time in there. And they finally caught wise to that. And it was pretty much after that if you two continue to cause disturbances, you're going to the principal's office. No more cloakroom. So that went on, and Gail and I finally, graduated from Wurlitzer grade school and went on to Felton Grammar Junior High, and that was a pretty easy transition for some reason. I'd had a little hernia surgery right before Felton Grammar, and I couldn't fight. So that ended a lot of the excitement of starting in a new school for me. Your behavior. Felton was okay. There was nothing exciting about it. And after Felton, of course, we moved on to high school. And I did my freshman year at North Tonawanda High. It was probably the first week of school. Gail and I were getting on the bus, and there was a big kid across the street. We'll say his name was Ken, but he used to come over late to where they picked us up for the bus and push everybody out of the way. And I'm going first because I'm the biggest and I'm the oldest. Well, I was a freshman in high school. He was a senior, but I didn't care. He pulled out one morning, and I grabbed him by the jacket and pulled him off the first step and started fighting with him. I said, we go in the order we arrive. And it was a short fight. I lost severely. And there was some disciplinary action for that. And from that day forward, it was, when we got on the bus, it was ladies first, and then the underclassmen, and Ken made sure that everyone got on the bus safely. I don't know what happened at his house, but I know what happened at mine. So we went out and we played freshman football. Pat Wiles was our coach. I really liked the idea of freshman football because I'd never played before. We didn't have youth football back in those days. I think all we had was Little League, maybe. So if we had any football prior to high school, it was just a neighborhood bunch of kids playing sandlot against another batch of kids from a different part of town. Football was an outlet for me to hit people and get complimented and not get into trouble. As a freshman, they had a whole slew of kids out. I can remember Pat Wiles, the coach, telling us, okay, everybody who wants to be a halfback, get on the line, and when I blow the whistle, run 10 yards. And when everybody wants to play guard, blow the whistle. And finally, and I didn't know what I wanted to play, so I just stood there like a dummy. And he finally said, everybody who wants to play fullback, step forward to the line. And I looked, and there was 2 kids. And I thought, how difficult could that be? So I stepped forward. I figured I had a 1 in 3 chance of making the team. So when I originally started football at NT as a freshman, I was a fullback. And it went well. We had a good season there at NT. As freshman, I think we played 4 or 5 games. We lost 1 game to Ben Franklin. I remember that. It was 2-0. They blocked my punt in the end zone, and it rolled out. And that was the 2 points they scored. At the end of my freshman year, my dad was transferred to Riverside, California, Southern Cal. So we left North Tonawanda, drove out to Riverside, and on our way, we went through, Iowa, Nebraska. We came to Wyoming, and there was a college there in Laramie. And instead of staying on the interstate, we detoured and went through the Snowy Mountain Range. It was a beautiful patch of mountains. There were crystal clear streams. There were lakes. There were skiing. It was a beautiful place, and we finished our trip and ended up down in Southern California. I played my sophomore year there, football at Ramona High School for the Ramona Rams. It's fun to say we finished the year with a perfect season. I think we were 0-10-0. Some of our games I can remember were 54 and 56-0. It was a brutal, humbling experience. At the end of the what would it be? First semester, Christmas vacation, my dad says, well, that's it for you. You're going back to NT and live with your grandparents. So I moved back over to Summer Street, and there were no more fights or anything like that. It all went well. And I finished my sophomore year. I went out for basketball, and I wasn't a very good basketball player, but they kept me on the team. And the biggest problem was I never could see anybody going in for a layup that I couldn't knock down and hit. So I played a little bit of blocking and tackling every chance I had in basketball. And I asked the coach, I said, we played about 5 games and you never put me in. And he said, when you quit playing football on the basketball court, we might send you in. And I thought, well, that probably means I'm not going to play any. So I said, thank you very much. But I went out for the swimming team and followed up in the spring with track. I guess next came my junior year. And we played for Vetter, Plewak. Nick Sebek was our new offensive man. And we had a good year. Our junior year, we lost our first game 7-6. We lost our last game to Tonawanda 7-6. Everything in between, we won by 20, 30, 40 points. We just had 2 bad games that year. And you always remember the losing games. And I can remember we were lined up probably on the 3-yard line. We were ahead 6-0, and we ran a play, and I was blocking. I was the right end at that time, and I had hit their tackle. I was down on the ground, and I heard the crowd roar, and I figured we scored. And then I found out we had a illegal motion or offside call. They put us back 5, and it was 4th down, and we didn't make it. And Tonawanda scored and won the game 7-6. as I say, I'll remember that play for a long, long time because we lost the game.
Let me ask you this. How was it playing for George Vetter and Nick Sebek and John Plewak?
I really enjoyed the Plewak. I didn't have much contact with Sebek because he worked mostly with the halfbacks, and Vetter, he was just a taskmaster. Everything had to go perfect. He was harsh or firm, let's say. He was firm to everyone, but he was fair. And when you messed up, he told you about it. He also told you what to do to fix it. And we spent a lot of time after time on blocking dummies, running plays. We always ran a strong right or unbalanced right line, or occasionally we run an unbalanced left. But in doing that, if you went unbalanced left, you just took the right end and moved them on the left, and everybody moved, and then you moved back the other way. And Sebek, to our surprise, convinced Vetter to put in some wing T plays. We kept our line the same. We still ran an unbalanced line, but we ran a T formation and found out, hey, we could run the ball up through the middle just about as easily as we could off tackle. So they were good, but my favorite had to be the Plewak. He always joked with you and told stories. And I remember one time he said, okay, you guys are the first defense. We're going to run 4 offensive plays and see if they can score. We'll set the ball right here on the 10. Well, they ran 4 plays, the offense, and we held them to the 2-yard line and said, well, Plew, we held them 4 downs. They made 8 yards. He says, yeah, but what if they started on the 6-yard line and it was goal to goal? You lost. And he was always pulling stuff like that. So they were fun. It wasn't until, I guess, my senior year I really learned about Coach Vetter.
How so?
Well, we played our games, and at the very beginning of the year, I think we played, I don't know, Kenrar 27-20. I think we beat them, and it was after the game. Vetter came up to me and he told me, he said, okay, you're going to play offensive end, but you're going to middle linebacker from now on. And I thought, well, that's all right. I'd like that. And after that, the points against us dropped considerably, and every now and then somebody scored 6, but nobody ever made 20 on us again. And when it came to Tonawanda, we were undefeated at that time. And a little bit before the game, George went up and he said, your job in this game is to stop Jim Britton. He was their end. He was about 6'5", great baseball player, pitcher, and their best receiver. He said, if you can stop Britton, we can win this game. And at that time, we used what they called the forearm shiver, where the object was to bring your arm up like this, push him away, hit him on the helmet with your left hand. So that's what we did in the Tonawanda game. And it was halftime. I think the score was 7-7. And we went into the locker room and Vetter was telling us what we had to do to win this one and win the title. And after he was done with everyone, he walked up to me. He said, Britton caught 3 passes in the first half. He's your man. If you can't handle him, let me know and I'll find somebody that can. So get out there the second half and stop him. So somewhere during the 3rd quarter, I just kept hammering this guy with a forearm shiver in my left hand. And suddenly I didn't see him in the game anymore. And Jim Britton was gone. And somewhere in the 3rd quarter, we scored another touchdown. And then towards the end, we threw a pass to we actually scored on a pass play to Frank Castiglione, and the game ended up, I think, 21-7. And after the game, they asked me, I shake hands with the Tonawanda guys, and they said, "Britain's looking for you." I said, "The game's over. I don't want to fight." He said, "Oh, no, go talk to him." So I did. And he said, "I've never been beaten up like that in my life." He said, I was a walking knockout. I'd go into the huddle. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I didn't know where I was supposed to go. And they finally sent me to the bench. And I guess, although I didn't mean to hurt the guy, I guess I did put him out of the game. And it was Coach Vetter, George, that convinced me I had to do that.
That 1960 team, Niagara Frontier League champions. You guys went 8-0. Points for were 231. Points against only 40 points. And you're correct. You gave up 20 points the first game of the year. You had 4 shutouts during the last 7 games, and you had no more than 7 points scored in any of those other games as well, too. Let me ask you, you were all Niagara Frontier League in your senior year. Was that on defense or as an offensive end?
Well, it had to be defense because I don't think I caught a pass my senior year from our quarterback. I can remember one of the teams we played scored a touchdown, and they went for a pass instead of a kick on their point after. And somehow the quarterback threw it to me and I caught it. But that was the only pass I caught my senior year. So if I made the all-star team, it probably was due to defensive play and offensive blocking.
You had a very good team. You had, John Chiasera, Frank Castiglione.
Right.
Your senior year, Dave Anastasi, who was a young player at that point, Ron Jamulla.
Correct.
Talk about playing with those guys, would you please?
Yes, I would. I'd be glad to. I think that everybody talks about John Chiasera and Frank Castiglione, but I always felt that those guys were great because of the 7 of us that were up front. We had on the left side, we had a Larry Barrett. He was left end, great blocker. And the Chuck Wageman was the left guard, and he used to lead when we ran the 46 to the right. Chuck led the play. He pulled, and he was a leader. And then we went through, let's see, Chuck led the play. Bobby Frank was the quarterback. He led. We had Jim Taylor, I believe, the fullback. He led. It was probably the precursor to the Southern Cal student body right or student body left. Everybody led the play, and Chiasera usually was the ball carrier. One thing that nobody ever mentioned, though, and I think they deserve special recognition, was Mike Lyndhurst and Volker Nas played on the right side of the center, and Mike was the guard, Lyndhurst, and Volker Nas was the inside tackle. If we ever needed 1 to 2 yards, it didn't matter who you gave the ball to, be it Bobby Frank, the quarterback, Taylor, the fullback, or Chiasera. You could go behind those 2 guys, and they would push out the defense, and you could get 2 to 3 yards every time. I don't think they ever stopped him on the middle. But with Jamulla, he was just a fun guy to play with. Ron would come up to the line every now and then, and he'd look at me and he'd say, "Watch." And he'd line up and he'd look at the guy across from him. He said, "We're coming over you this time. You best just fall down so you don't get hurt." And the guy would look at him, and sure enough, we'd go over him 2 or 3 times. And then Ron would switch it up. He'd say this, he said, "I'm going to tell him you're going to block." And we'd go up to the line, and Jamulla says, "You see this guy here next to me? He's got you this time. I'm going for the linebacker." And Jamulla blocked him again anyway, and I got the linebacker. But he always was talking to the other lineman, the defensive lineman on the other team. And he was good. He was fast on the snap and a good hard blocker. And on defense, he was fantastic.
Was that something that you guys did to each and every opponent in every game? Jamulla would talk trash to them and say we're coming at you and coming over to you and
He didn't do that in every game. Sometimes, some of the times, I don't know why he did it. He'd get upset with the guy playing across from him, and we did it. I don't think we did it against Tonawanda. I don't think we did it against Kenmore, but we may have started that with Lockport and some of the other teams that he talked trash to him. Just a little bit, but not bad.
what was your TNT experience, the games against Tonawanda? What was that like for you?
That was an amazing game every year. You look forward to that, irregardless of your one-loss record. If you'd lost everything and went into your last game and beat Tonawanda, it was a success. If you had won all your games like we had and Tonawanda was left, you're scared to death that they could beat you. And when we played them, it was on their field, and the crowd was amazing. There were people all over. I mean, the stadium was full. They lined it. I think they read an article after the game. There were close to 10,000 people, 8 to 10,000 people at the stadium, both in the stands and surrounding the field. It was an intense game. It was hard hitting. I found out after the game too that the center they had, I think his name was Gary Miller. He told me after the game, he said, you know, on that first extra point you kicked, you broke my nose. I said, I know, I didn't know that. And I went back and looked at the game films that you guys posted online. And sure enough, I think when he came through to block the extra point, I put my arm up, and then we had just a double bar back in those days. And somehow it got in between his bar and his helmet. I broke his nose with my elbow. And then I knocked Jim Britton out of the game. And I was a punter, and I think I had a 65-yard punt in that game. So I felt really good about how I played. And it was great for everybody. We finally won all 8 games in 1 year.
You told me that you didn't hang around with too many of your teammates. You had a different crowd that you ran around with in North Tonawanda. Talk about that.
I don't know why I didn't hang out with the football players much, but I didn't. My friends, you probably you've interviewed some of their folks. I hung out with Jim McGlisco. He was basketball. Bobby Rogo, Doc Rogo's kid. He was basketball. There's a kid, Mike Schmidt. He was statistician for the basketball team, and he was a discus and I believe a half miler on track. Paul Schiller was a tennis player, and Tom Newton didn't play sports, but he was the first one to turn 18. So he was the official beer man for the crew.
We all had that growing up in NT. We really did.
Yeah. The first guy to turn 18 was part of your group. And so I hung out with those guys. And when I wasn't hanging out with them, I had a girlfriend that I dated for quite a while, and I was usually with her. And if I wasn't with the guys and I wasn't with her, I was home because I was grounded for getting bad grades. I spent a fair amount of time grounded. I used to laugh that I was grounded more than Treetop Airlines. So, and it was all due to my grades. Too much time in athletics and not enough time on the books.
Were you recruited at all for college football?
I wouldn't say that. The only inquiries I had 2 letters, one for the University of Buffalo, and the other one surprised me, was from Coach Blackman, and he was at Dartmouth. And I probably received a letter every other week from Coach Blackman up at Dartmouth. And I wrote to him and said, I really wasn't that interested in going to Dartmouth. I wasn't that interested in going to UB. And I talked to Vetter about it, and I said, I'd really like to go out and give Wyoming a shot. And he put in a word for me out there, and I ended up at Wyoming. I probably never would have scored high enough on an SAT to get into Dartmouth. I for some reason I didn't do well on the what did they call those, comprehensive exams or something like that. I'd get in and I'd get frustrated. I can remember some of the tests, they had a geometric design, and they'd say, if we turned it upside down and you looked at it from the rear, how would it look? And you had 3 or 4 options, and it was like, I have no idea. So I skipped all of those. And then I got to the English sections, and they might have 3 adverbs and 1 adjective, and nobody ever told me you had to pick out the adjective. I just looked at them and thought, okay, I'm just going to circle B on all of them. Maybe that's the right answer. So I never scored well on those.
Did you pick Wyoming because your family going through and you made that detour going to California?
Well, there was 2 things. Paul, shucks.
Okay, take your time.
I was trying to think of Paul's name. He was a quarterback during my junior year. Paul went out to Wyoming to play while I was a senior. And he said he had a good time. He liked it out there, but he returned to North Tonawanda and finished his school locally. And then we had the trip out through the snowy range going to Wyoming, and I thought, I really liked that part of Wyoming. I could go back. And those were the 2 motivating factors, I guess. Paul went there first, and then the mountains, the water, the snowy range, it was just something I really thought I'd enjoy. And I did.
People don't realize or don't know that you did go to Wyoming. You also became a veterinarian, and were a veterinarian in Texas for quite a long time. And now you live in Alaska. But you told me earlier that, playing football at Wyoming, your first year was an eye-opening experience, for lack of a better way to describe it. So could you please share that story with the rest of the internet world here?
Okay, well, I went out there, and our coach, he was good. He's the one that left. Bob Devaney was the head coach at Wyoming, and he was there my freshman year. He eventually left, I believe, my sophomore year and went on to build the Nebraska football dynasty. But anyway, when you went to Laramie, it was interesting. We had about 50 freshman scholarships. There was a rich doctor up in Rawlins, Wyoming, that wanted Wyoming to have great football. So he sponsored about 50 freshmen to try out and make the varsity their sophomore, junior, and senior year. At the end of the freshman year, they kept about a dozen to maybe 15 of the freshman players. It was it was a real dogfight to make the team, because a lot of us knew that there were going to be a lot of cuts and a lot of kids were going home. And I was lucky. I had a full ride scholarship there, tuition, books, room, board, et cetera, et cetera. And I was doing really, really well. And I did forget to mention one thing about George Vetter. Before I left for Wyoming, he saw me out on the field working out one evening, and he said, "Don't be surprised. I predict the coach is going to move you to center." I said, "That'll work fine. I'd like that position." So I was on the freshman squad. I was doing really well. We played the varsity. As on offense, we'd run the other team's plays, and on defense, they'd run plays. And I'd knock the quarterback down umpteen times. I'd hit the halfbacks and banged them around pretty good. Did a lot of good blocking, and I was having a great time at it. And we were about 2 weeks away from our first game against the Air Force Academy. And I was getting the hang of the center snaps, but I hadn't figured out the long snap yet. I could roll them on the ground, or I could shoot them over the head, and occasionally I even hit them in the hands. We were running a tackling drill where you had one defensive player in front of you, two bags, and the guy carried the ball, and you had to tackle him. I shucked the blocker and made the tackle, and just as I hit him, the blocker came back and nailed me in the right knee and tore it up badly. And I can remember getting help to the training room, and you asked the trainer, "How is it?" And he said, "It's bad." And once they cut your pants off of you, you knew it was serious enough. So I missed football from then on. My knee, I tore the ACL, the MCL, the cartilage was bad. And I had surgery in Cheyenne, and they said, "Well, we'll take out the cartilage, hit the weight room, and you'll be fine. You'll be ready for spring ball." Well, something went wrong in the surgery, and I never regained over a 90-degree bend in my right knee anymore. And even to this day, it only goes 90 degrees. So I had great aspirations in Laramie to go out and be the smartest football player on the team, and also make the team. Because the football ended abruptly, I had to go back in and concentrate on my schoolwork, which was a big disappointment. I guess the only thing I could say about the NT high school is that when I went to Laramie, we took placement exams, and I was wavered freshman English and went into English composition. I took a placement in chemistry, and I had qualified to take a full year of freshman chemistry in one semester. I thought that was a great idea. I went and talked to the athletic director about it. He kind of looked at me and said, "So what's the problem?" I said, "Well, the problem is the classes are during regular school hours, but chemistry lab's Saturday morning." And he looked at me and said, "That's football time." I said, "I know. What do you think?" He said, "I think the athletic department is paying your scholarship, not the chemistry department. It would be wise to just take the regular chemistry class." So I took the chemistry that required a full year, which was fine. And it turned out to be the good move in the end, because when I was finally accepted to veterinary school at Texas A&M, they looked at my records and said, "Say, you're approved or accepted on the condition that you take freshman English and pass it, and you take Texas history." So after 4 years in Laramie, I was off to Texas A&M for summer school to take Texas history and freshman English. And of course, freshman and the Texas history was interesting because being from New York, I learned all about the Northern War of Aggression, which some folks used to call the Civil War. And it was an interesting study on a different perspective on what really happened, cause and effect of the Civil War. And then veterinary school started, and 3 years later, graduated from veterinary school. We went to school at Texas A&M year round. We started on Labor Day, first day of class. We got out around the 25th of August, took a week off, started all over again. It was an intensive 3 years. After that, I worked around Houston. I got married to my Wyoming cowgirl, Patsy Hill. She came down and taught school in and around Houston. And I went to work for a veterinary clinic that did small animals. I worked for another veterinarian who did horses, and I worked at the Sealy livestock auction, vaccinating hogs, preg checking cattle, and doing blood testing on cows and semen evaluations on bulls. So I had a little bit of everything under my belt before I decided to come up to Alaska.
Let me ask you something before you go to the Alaska story. With your injury at Wyoming, how hard was it for you to take the helmet off and the pads off and the cleats off and give up football?
It was miserable. I went through about a 6-month spell there where I really felt sorry for myself. I started out great in school, and by the second semester, when I knew I was done, I struggled on the second semester. I got some bad. I did all right in the chemistry. I think I know I did. I got an F in calculus. I think I had a grade point. It was pretty close to 0 degrees Kelvin, if they'd say that. I just didn't care. I think I got a D in ROTC. I just wasn't interested anymore.
So what got you out of that funk?
I don't know. I got a job up in Wyoming in the mountains that summer, the first summer. I was working for an old man, Nick Dietrich. We were building a horse trail up to the Continental Divide in a wilderness area up by Yellowstone. We started at, we went out on horseback. It was 8,000 feet where we started, and we went up to about 11,000. We did it all with picks and shovels. We were allowed a chainsaw, a rock drill, and evening we stayed in camps. There were no motorized vehicles in the area. It was all horses and pack trip. Nick was an interesting man. He fought for Kaiser Wilhelm in World War I, came to the United States after the war. He kind of talked to me a lot, and I told him what had happened, and he said, well, you lost a knee, we lost the war. I came back. I came back to the United States. I have a homestead up here in Wilson, Wyoming. I've had contracts with the government, and I worked through it. And he said, if you're going to do anything with your life, you're going to have to get over the fact that football's over and you have to move on. And I thought about it, and the guy was right. So I went back my sophomore year and picked it up where I left off after my first semester.
You were down in Texas, a hotbed of college football, Texas A&M, University of Texas, all those schools, Oklahoma.
Right.
Did it bother you, during the football, or had football passed you by and you were okay with having football around you and not bothering you so much?
I always went to the games, the A&M games, and I, of course, was in the student section, and I would watch these games, and I always wondered to myself, do you think you could make it out there? Do you think if you hadn't been injured, you could have played? And I guess my ultimate thought was during watching the games and going to veterinary school, I kept thinking, it was possible to finish your pre-veterinary work in 2 years with good grades. Veterinary school was 3 years. You had 5 years to use up 4 years of athletic eligibility. And I often wondered if I'd have applied myself better in the classroom, I could have made vet school my 3rd year. And on my last year of veterinary school, I could have begged the dean to let me go out and try for the A&M team. I'm not too sure how that would have worked out because we had senior clinics with both livestock and pets, but it always crossed my mind that maybe if I had done things a little bit differently, I might have had a chance down there to at least put a uniform on, but it didn't work out. But I graduated from veterinary school and life's good.
Then you end up in Alaska, of all places. So you've got an NT guy who lived briefly in California, came back, finished up at high school in North Tonawanda, went to Wyoming, then transferred to Texas A&M for veterinary school, worked a little bit down in Houston, and now, of all places, how did you end up in Alaska?
I left out something. I didn't have to look at my notes. When I left for Wyoming to go play football and go to college, my dad was transferred to Houston, Texas.
Okay.
My folks lived down in Houston at that time. So when it was time to apply to veterinary school, I applied to Colorado State, Washington State, Kansas State, and they all said, if you want to go to veterinary school, you go to Texas A&M because you're a resident of Texas and they have a vet school. Go there or don't go. So that's how I ended up at Texas A&M. So after graduation, my wife and I thought we might go back to Wyoming. I checked around Wyoming, and Wyoming's population was just a little bit above Alaska at the time. I think Alaska may have had 300,000 and Wyoming may have had 325,000 or something. But most of the jobs up there were driving pickup trucks, working on cattle, beef cattle, and nobody was hiring to speak of. They were all kind of single practices. So Pat and I decided, well, let's go up to Alaska. And there's an agricultural area up there called the Matanuska Valley. They have dairy farms and they have a lot of dogs up there. So I wrote to the Alaska state's, the senator from the state of Alaska and said, what do you know? What can you help me with? And I found out that the veterinarian who worked this area was retiring. And I thought, well, it's a good chance for me to jump in after he retires. So we moved up. I met him, Jim Pazaruski. He took me around all of the farms and showed me the area. And that's how I started my practice up here, was out of the back of an international scout. And my wife was a school teacher, PE. And we settled on in and have been here ever since.
Looking back, you ever pinch yourself and said, I did pretty well, a kid from North Tonawanda out by Ascension School, and look what I've accomplished. And better yet, you have any regrets, perhaps, how things turned out for you?
I hate to sound greedy, but if I had any regrets, it was that I didn't buy more land up here when I first moved up. But that was an easy decision because I didn't have any money to buy it. But Pat and I moved up. We probably didn't have $1,000 in the bank. And one of the farmers that you see out here with the land came over. He said, I've got 40 acres. There's more money in accounting than there is in milking cows. I'll sell you 40 acres for $800 an acre. And I thought, I don't have $1,000 to my name. But Pat and I talked about it and we ended up with 15 acres. I talked to my dad and he bought the next 10. So we ended up with enough, more than enough land up here. As far as
Go ahead. No. Go ahead, Bert. Finish.
I was just going to say that was the only regret I had, is that, and in doing so, the more land the land here in Palmer is all flat. It's glacial silt that's blown in. It's all agricultural, and it has a gravel base. We've got water at 65 to 75 foot coming down out of the mountains. It's perfect water. And unfortunately, it's where all the developers are building houses right now because it's flat and it's the easiest place to build. There's good water, good drainage. And, you know, you can see your developer, they want to make their bucks too. So they're buying up as much of this property as they can now for housing. Sad, but it's happening all over the United States.
We've talked about a lot of things during this conversation. What would you like to talk about that I haven't brought up?
I'd like to tell you that I was a veterinarian up in Alaska. When I went away to Wyoming, I'll try not to ramble too long here. When I went away to Wyoming, my parents wanted me to be a dentist. There was nothing in the world that I could think of worse than being a dentist. Being in a room all day long, looking in people's mouths. I wanted to do something where I could be outside part of the time, and something that I thought I might enjoy. I wanted to be a coach. I wanted to teach physics or chemistry, math in high school. My folks wanted none of that. So when I left for Wyoming, I really had no interest in dentistry. And as I say, I ended up in veterinary medicine, which was a great, I guess they got the doctor they wanted. And when Pat and I moved to Alaska, the school system up here had basketball. That's all they had was high school basketball and junior high basketball. There was little league in the summertime. In a matter of a year or two, Pat and I became involved with the youth activities. And Pat was the PE teacher, and she started cross-country skiing, ice skating outdoors. She started cross-country, track, and what was the other one? I'll think of it in a minute. But with that, we started with a youth football program up here. Pat was on the committee for the youth program, and I was a coach on the youth football. We moved that, and we worked until we got the youth program up into the high school. We, in the 70s, we started on hockey. I never played hockey in my life. And next thing I knew, I was coaching hockey with my wife's help. We started a youth program. We eventually got the program into the high school. So kids today that are going to high school in Palmer, they can play football, they can play hockey, basketball. There's cross-country skiing. Oh, that was the other one Pat started, cross-country skiing, running cross-country, outdoor skating, and soccer. And while I coached football and coached hockey, I umpired Little League, I umpired girls and women's softball, I refereed soccer from youth through high school, and I think that was about the extent of my athletics stuff up here in Palmer. And I had a great time. I got to be a veterinarian, and I got to pursue the athletics as a coach and as an official here in our area. And it was all with the help of my wife, who helped me out with coaching, do this, do that. And I told her, I said, I don't know anything about hockey. She said, hockey's like basketball. They run screens, they run give and go. I said, I never learned any of that. So she taught me all about the formations and got me clued in on hockey. It was a lot of fun. Both of my boys, hockey, they both ended up playing Division I, one in Fairbanks and one in Anchorage. They went on and played a little semi-pro hockey, and it's been a fun time. My grandson ended up going to high school in Palmer. He wasn't a problem. It was the COVID where he couldn't get out of the house. So they sent him to Palmer, Alaska. So we had two of our boys went through the hockey program here in a grandson. It's been great.
You've seen different eras of high school athletes. What pieces of advice would you give today's athletes?
You got to be quick and strong. I think they're so much more athletic than we were. We were brutal. We were brutes. Ours was single wing. It was all brute force. Today, the kids, I think, are faster, speed wise. They're quicker. They're better on their feet. They're multi-talented kids. We were not that good. I don't know. I often joke that if I went back to high school today, I'd probably be playing JV ball.
You got back to North Tonawanda last year,
Yes.
probably the first time in quite a few years. What would you like
Yes.
to say to some of your former teammates or people who you grew up with in North Tonawanda who are still probably around?
I visited a few of them, and those that were alive, and talked to a couple of the other guys. It was an interesting experience. I'd heard about this Hall of Fame. I had some scrapbooks from my grandmother from 1936 that I knew if I left them in the chest, that when I died and my kids took it, they'd probably end up in the dump. It was a great place to take the scrapbooks and the athletic programs from 1936. And I left them with you folks at the Hall of Fame. I didn't have any idea what a great job you had done back there, putting this all back together for everyone. It was interesting to see how much hard work has been put into that, and to be part of it.
Got to ask you one final question.
Sure.
You played in 1959 and 1960 in North Tonawanda, graduated in 1961. How would you like to have Bert Gore remembered in North Tonawanda history?
North Tonawanda history. It's a kid that played 3 sports, lettered, and always 1 point shy of being on the honor roll.
You did good. Not many people can say that they had the type of journey that you've had. And
that's true.
And you're an inspiration to the up and coming youth that's like, oh my goodness, you can do anything. And you're the perfect example of it.
Yeah, kids today have a lot of opportunities, a lot of choices, make good ones, find a mentor like that old German guy, Nick Dietrich, who helped me out.
Bert Gore, this was a lot of fun. I want to thank you so much for joining me here today and sharing your memories. I wish you well. Best of luck with your life in Alaska. And thanks for sharing these memories.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, Ed.